In this video, we're going to be giving you 5 lessons I learned from Rick Rubin in his new book, The Creative Act. Spectacular book. After those 5 lessons, I'm going to go into a quick short book review. I wish I could talk about this more, but YouTube retention rates are short, so I'll keep it to the snappy, punchy bits. And if you guys request it, I could do a more in-depth hour-long podcast about the subject. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Rick Rubin, this guy is a legend. He is probably one of the greatest music producers of all time. I really wasn't that familiar with him until I picked up this book. So for credibility's sake, he is an American record executive and producer. He co-founded Def Jam Records. He's the founder of American Recordings, former co-president of Columbia Records. He was named top 100 most influential people in the world, and he was named the most important producer of the last 20 years by MTV. He has produced for acts including, but not limited to, the Beastie Boys, Run DMC, LL Cool J, and the list goes on. Linkin Park, Metallica, Red Hot Chili Peppers. So obviously I had to learn more about this person. I was very curious about him, but really didn't know much about him other than, a couple podcasts I've seen over the years. And of course, a couple video interviews on YouTube. And very interesting guy. He definitely has that kind of Zen quality with how he carries himself and how he speaks. It's a very calm, slow way of speaking, and he has this giant white beard. So it's just very zen, and fittingly, his book is called The Creative Act. It's a nice short read. So let me get into the 5 points, and I have a lot more to say, but I'll leave that to the book review section at the end. So lesson 1, everyone is a creator. You do not need to have something that is sold for money, encased in glass in some museum, published somewhere, distributed, shown to the world to be a creator. So it really kind of opened my eyes to what a creator is. In fact, he went so far as to say that just finding a creative way of getting from work to home is a creative act. This is not something that you need to publicize to anyone other than yourself. Almost everyone's a creator in some way. And so that really opens my eyes and makes me think, oh, okay, just because I'm not, creating music or art doesn't mean that I can't learn something with my creativity, whether in business, whether in terms of a YouTube video, or just your everyday person. And, that's really saying something and opening up the book. It likens to some other books I've read where, they say everyone's a salesman. That's To Sell is Human by Dan Pink, where he's saying everything is a sale. Everything is some level of persuasion or influence. So with certain professions and skill sets, arguably, we're all doing them regardless of whether or not we realize it or not. So might as well, improve them. And with this art, it's so much more fun. It's not about always making money. It's about expressing yourself in all forms. The second lesson I want to bring out is you really need to keep and adopt that childlike state of openness, of curiosity, of awe and amazement about the world. Now with children, they're very much just this, open-minded being that's in awe and amazement and curious about even the most mundane and simple things about life. The most successful artists that Rick has had the fortune of experiencing life with are ones who really were able to keep that childlike sense of wonder, and they were able to incorporate that into the art that they built. And so it's important to not lose it. As I was thinking about that, I was actually driving in traffic, And it was just, tons of cars all around me, pretty mundane. And immediately it opened my eyes. And that mundaneness became something that was actually quite incredible, because I realized, well, to a day-to-day person, yeah, it's just you're stuck in traffic. But when you take a step back, you realize I'm in this really bizarre world where they've stripped out the nature. They've put in these, this concrete jungle on the road. All the animals are guarded, and there's all these like hundreds of mechanical boxes around me. And what I think is normal is actually a really unique, bizarre, artificial, amazing place. It's manufactured, but that's amazing in its own way. All these giant, 2,000, 3,000 pound machines all around me. So we do live in a kind of bizarre, futuristic experience if you just open yourself to that childlike sense of wonder that we so easily lose. And I would argue even children lose that fairly quickly, or there's parts of it where they just don't have. If you've ever hung around kids, teenagers, or little toddlers, I mean, some of them after the first couple years of life, they themselves are bored of the roads, and they're like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? So it's very much important to kind of keep that in tune. And Rick says that we immediately over time just start to tune out most of what we take in from the world, and just only pick up what's essential. I mean, we're getting hundreds, thousands of stimuli and little things every day, but we're just tuning them out. And so it's important to kind of rekindle that sense of childlike wonder. So the third tip I have for you is, don't be so quick to say no to any idea. An idea, when described by another artist, is oftentimes poorly described, but once it's executed, it is often sometimes amazing. Oftentimes, Rick will be approached by an artist, and this artist will, explain their idea, and it just sounds like a terrible idea. And what Rick will say back is, sounds great, let me see it. And then once he actually sees the finished product, it is actually amazing. Now think about that. What do most people do? I've seen people in the business world, in my workplace, who are, superiors. They'll hear an idea, and, they'll be kind to it, but then, behind closed doors, they'll be, they'll tell others that was a terrible idea, and then they'll just, scrap it, ignore it, never move forward with it. Now, sure, there are some terrible ideas out there. I'm not saying every idea is great, but how many great ideas are shot down before they even are birthed? Especially when it's a creative art form, you never know where it can lead, and especially with things like YouTube, where the cost of entry to create that idea is, not too much money. Might as well, put it out there to see what actually comes of it, rather than shoot it down before you even start. And another great example of this is Will Smith and The Matrix. So Will Smith a few years ago put out a YouTube video explaining how he was pitched before Keanu Reeves on being the star of The Matrix. And because it was pitched in such a wacky way, now keep in mind, the movie hadn't been made yet. It was just these, two people, the Wachowski brothers, who were just pitching this crazy idea of this world, that it sounded so ridiculous and stupid that, Will declined on the offer. Now, it turned out The Matrix was a revolutionary film, still talked about to this day in pop culture. And it was because the idea was not explained well that it was shot down. Now, all in all, it worked out for the better. I think, had Will Smith been cast instead of Keanu, there would have been a lot of other cast changes. It probably wouldn't have been the perfect film it was today. I mean, those castings were perfect. But, still, it's the concept of, having that idea and letting it blossom rather than kill it on sight is really important. Have you ever had the experience where you thought about a great idea, whether that's a business idea or just an idea in general, and then you see your idea emerge in the world in the next year? Well, that's a fairly common occurrence, but to see your ideas come to life from another person when you don't act on them, it's not because the other person stole your idea, it's because every idea has a time, and the time for that idea has yet to come. Moving on to the fourth bullet point and lesson, you really have to think about the external versus internal world and focus on what's in your control and put that out to the best of your ability, rather than worry or bother yourself over what is out of your control, what the world has to offer. So Rick gives this through a few examples. And I like how the book really kind of, in many ways, it tries to stay holistic. So he very rarely brings in too many name drop. He doesn't name drop at all. And then it's, clearly not focused on just music creation. There's a couple music examples, but he tries to keep it holistic. And so for this example, he does have one, which is when an artist puts out an album and releases it, he has no control of if another big album is dropping at the same time, which may take away from his release. He has no control on how the sales of that album will perform. And his point is, that's not of your concern. Don't stress about it. Focus on what you can do, which is to put out the best art that you can. And it sounds so simple. Maybe it sounds obvious. Maybe you've heard it in other personal development terms. I've heard it in other ways as well, just in terms of general, focus on anxiety and self-development. If your boss is having a bad day, you can't control that, but you can control your work output. If a hurricane's coming, you can't control that, but you can control how you react to that and how it's going to affect your life and so forth. So I've heard it in other contexts, but this is definitely applied to the creative act itself. And I do think that while simple, maybe obvious to some, or maybe not so obvious, maybe that's new to some of you out there, I think it's very much to be used, and it could be better used. I mean, when I read Alex Banayan's book a few years ago, The Third Door, he wrote about a exchange he had with Lady Gaga. Alex is basically this young kid who wanted to interview some of the world's greatest people. So he reached out to thousands of them, and then a small percentage were willing to talk to him briefly, and he just kind of compiled those answers in his book, The Third Door. And one of those people was Lady Gaga. And with Lady Gaga, she released an album that occurred during his Alex's interview with Lady Gaga, and that album was not being received so well, and she was really down on herself about it. And without going into too many details, the point was, even Lady Gaga was messing up on certain things that I feel Rick was talking about, where she was letting certain external circumstances, public opinion, approval, and so forth, really, critics, and a bunch of other stuff that I don't have time to get into to keep this video concise, they were affecting her general mood and so forth, when they should not. Rick says, focus on your inner world, focus on what you can control, and that's it. Don't get stuck up on what you can't control. Our inner world is every bit as interesting, beautiful, and surprising as nature itself. It is, after all, born of nature. When we go inside, we are processing what's going on outside. We're no longer separate, we're connected, we are one. As you can tell, there's a lot of very kind of Zen, somewhat esoteric cryptic sayings in the book. I mean, so much more to say, but the final lesson I will say about this book is when you're creating out there, it's really about tapping into what you can control and essentially going into what inspires you. If you're feeling burnt out, if you're feeling like that piece is not coming, Rick argues that this is a sign that you're just not tapped into something. Move on, create something new, try something different, and maybe it'll come back to you in time, and you can resume that old piece. But if you're tapped out, if you're burnt out, if you're uninspired and you're stuck on one creative piece, whether that's a song, a painting, a book, piece of writing, or a way of getting home, put that aside and realize that this may be a sign that you're not tapped into something that's inspiring you anymore. Something's blocking you. Try creating something different. He even has a rule for this. If you're it's something like called the rule of two, but essentially, if you're stuck on song 1, start on songs 2 and 3, and then if you're stuck on 2 and 3, start songs 4 and 5. And he says there's something magical about that, where if you're doing 2 other things, then you have these multiple things to kind of build momentum and bring you forward. You're not just moving on one thing. And so you have this chunk to work on, and then you can get back to it, or you can start another chunk, and that kind of builds momentum when you're, say, creating an album. So there's a lot about the book about simplicity, about cutting down. You cut down from 12 songs to 6, not 12 songs to 11. And just kind of moving towards that essence. And this would be a good time to move into the book review. So obviously I have a lot more to say, but that's probably reserved more for some type of 1 hour long podcast, which I could do if there's interest, or a long book article review, which I've also done on my blog. I'll just keep this concise. I think Rick's book is definitely structured as one of those kind of Zenish. I mean, I just get the feel. I don't know if that's his intention, but I get the feel that the book's kind of one of those Zen, almost philosophical books that aren't like too long to read, but if you can get through it in like 6 hours or so, and then you keep coming back to it, because it's not necessarily a biography. It's not a memoir. It's not a nonfiction, long, step-by-step instructional book that you get through once, like The Power of Habit, and then you don't get to it again. There's no scientific references in here. It's a philosophical book, like the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, or the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. And so, with all these different tombs, they're not too long of a read, but there's things that are in there that are so philosophical that you go back to them in time, because you may not understand them fully the first time. That paired with just his general demeanor, he has this Zen quality, this white beard. He's often like not wearing shoes or socks in his video interviews. It all just pairs well together. Even the book cover is structured in that way. And to his credit, he mentions in the book that you put out your art. You don't force an idea or a meaning, because you never know how the audience is going to interpret it. And oftentimes the art pieces that aren't trying to force a meaning are the ones that are most adopted by pop culture or the public. And I don't know if he was trying to go for a philosophical angle, maybe based off his book cover, but that's kind of how I'm feeling it. And the beauty of a book like this is it has such credibility and weight behind it through who he is, as mentioned. Whereas if you have another book, let's say someone else wrote the same book, but he's just like a nobody, no one's going to really, pay as much attention to it. And so that's the thing. With Stephen Pressfield's book, I didn't know who Stephen Pressfield was. It had to grow its merit on its own, and it did to an extent. Many people recommend this book, The War of Art, not to be confused with the other one, which is also good, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. But no one knows who Stephen Pressfield is. It was really the book itself that introduced some good ideas that really caught storm, and then people started to recommend it. But I mean, this is Rick Rubin, and the book itself already has some great ideas. But when you have a book that's just asserting things without any scientific evidence, at least for me, someone who's more scientific and pragmatic, I'm like, well, what's your credibility? Why should I listen to you when you're just spouting ideas? And so with books like that, like The Way of the Superior Man, where there's not much evidence other than the author claiming that it works and that it worked for his clients, I'm more skeptical. But this is Rick Rubin. The book is definitely structured in a way where it's a lot of these ideas and thoughts. There's not much scientific backing or stories to back it up, which a book like The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg would need more of to substantiate its claims. With Rick and his book, I just went for it because I know who the author is, so I trust his ideas. And what I liked about his preface is he said, these are just a book of ideas. It's not hard, fast rules. Take the ideas that work for you, ignore the ones that don't, and go from there. So he's not claiming that this is some end-all, be-all rules. These are simply ideas that he has found to be useful through his practice of being, one of the greatest producers of all time. And it definitely has inspired me a bit to potentially rekindle music in some way. I used to be very much in tune with music. I still am as a consumer, and you may see it in some of my vlogs and videos. But generally speaking, I've kind of gone away from music, and I used to be a competitive classical piano player, competed all the way up at the state level, won competitions at the state level. It was a very kind of cutthroat competitive scene, but I never lost that love of music, and I wish it was less cutthroat. And I admire the pop music scene, which is more about just like loving music. And I think the book has a lot of points if you want to get into just learning about how you can be inspired more, how you can look at creative things in new perspectives. If you want new ideas on how you can, create awesome work and how to move through that work and be inspired, it's fantastic. I also noticed the book has a lot of phrases and terminologies that are similar, but not the same thing as the whole law of attraction field. Now, I'm not a huge advocate or follower of the whole law of attraction set of books, but I have read a few of those out of curiosity, and they use terms like source energy, infinite intelligence, and tapping into source energy and whatnot. I know a couple musicians are, so Mike Posner, Big Sean, they're really into The Secret and stuff like that. For me, I've been curious, so I've read about that, but I don't think it's not necessarily the only way to success. I mean, I never hear Bill Gates or Warren Buffett talking about that stuff, but there's definitely some interesting ideas in that realm, and I think there's definitely certain terms in this book that was similar to that, but not of that. I could tell Rick doesn't necessarily follow that either, because it's not the same, but he does talk in a more Zenish Buddhist kind of way. similar to that, but you can tell it's not that. What I mean by that is he'll use phrases like the source rather than source intelligence or whatnot. And I can tell he's referring to something different. It's similar to that, but it's not the same. Because when he refers to source, he's not referencing it as some type of infinite source energy that has all the answers to, abundance and wealth, like those, laws of attraction books. He's referencing the source, and he calls it the vessel. More so just in terms of general concepts he's created to tap into creativity, and then the vessel being you as the person conducting that creativity. So while he does talk very much in a kind of the art of the war of art type of way, where it's kind of like a bit woo-woo, it's not exactly the law of attraction. So just be careful of that, because some people are going to be like, oh, Rick Rubin's a huge fan of the law of attraction. No, he's using terms of his own making that may sound similar, but it's not. They're defined differently. So very interesting book. I was always more curious about his demeanor. It feels like he's meditated a lot. When you see him on interviews, on podcasts or video interviews, he has this kind of like coolness to him that is almost akin to Russell Simmons in a way. When I read Russell Simmons' books, who's also, a very accomplished musician, producer in his own right, owner of his own record labels. Russell said that, he believes his key to success was meditation. He actually wrote a couple books about meditation. And, Russell has this kind of levelness to him where, he used to have the high of highs and the lows of lows, or a word of partying, drugs, music, money. But, after meditation, everything's just kind of even. It's not that he's not happy with the celebrations and the wins, but, he doesn't let that define him. So he's not, while everyone else is celebrating, he's more kind of level with that. And while that's not something that the book covers, it was something that drew me to the book, because Rick, just through his presence, had a similar kind of Zen state of just like general happiness, almost like a monk of some sort, a Buddhist monk, where he's just generally, I don't know if enlightened is the right word, but the book it drew me to that. And so I think, I learned a lot from the book. I'll definitely be reading it multiple times. I definitely didn't interpret it completely the right way. I wouldn't say it's a religious text, because it's not. So, just take it as it is. It's a book of ideas to be more creative. But, it is definitely more a step in that direction than, a more practical how-to book that I'm used to, like Willpower by Roy Baumeister, or, something like that. And, with this book, I think one last lesson I want to kind of impart on you before we conclude is, Rick mentions that, with this creative act, with this act of, creation and creating stuff and feeling inspired and using that source energy, he doesn't call it source energy, tapping from the source to create as a vessel. It's something that's, there's ways of doing it better than others, so that you stay inspired, you stay creative, you stay kind of focused on that, and you let it blossom. And I think the general energy and feeling I got from the book was that there are pathways to doing that better than just, ramming your head against the wall and feeling burnt out and feeling like, this is how you got to do it. So I highly recommend it. This guy has decades